are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we're discussing Impending Halfhead, track 8 on 2005's Potemkin City Limits. This tune is 1 minute and 14 seconds long, and it is the second shortest tune on this album, roughly doubling the length of Super Bowl Patriot 36, which is hilariously 36 seconds long.
I was so delighted when I realized that Super Bowl Patriot 36 was actually 36 seconds long. It's the perfectly timed fade out, sort of, because I think the song is more like 33 seconds, but it kind of fades out for an additional 3 seconds on the record. And I was like, that has to be on purpose. But Steve, this is a very exciting episode for me. This is the last song that needs an episode for the Potemkin City Limits record. So this is pretty much of a fabulous accomplishment for me, considering that this is the first album that we are finishing in full. And I am delighted that this is your second Potemkin episode after our completely wild and crazy Fadala's Hearse episode. I think with the Fadala's Hearse episode, you got to have like very much the full experience of what is possible on this podcast, because you did the interview, you got the guest to make a wonderful cover, and then we had to do tons of research and reading. So that episode really kind of showed you the full gamut of what is possible, I think, on this podcast. So I'm really glad that we had that experience.
It's definitely, that was one of my favorite episodes that we've done so far, because it was a lot of work, that one, but it was extremely rewarding.
Yeah, that's the craziest thing about this project, is that you think that it's going to be something like whenever Keith and I started this show years ago, we thought that every episode was going to be like 30 or 40 minutes, that we were going to be in and out, and it was going to be really easy. And then before you know it, it's like, oh my God, that episode was 1 hour and 50 minutes. And oh my gosh, that one was 2 hours and 35 minutes. And holy smokes, this one's 3 hours and 15 minutes. And it just kept getting more and more expansive because of what is possible. But this is a really interesting one because no one has ever requested Impending Halfhead. As far as I know, no guest has ever written to me and begged for, when are you doing the Impending Halfhead episode? Like, I've gotten requests for things like Fadala and Oka Everywhere and Mate Ka. Like, people were like on it requesting certain songs, and this was never one of them. So this is kind of like a really seemingly forgotten and overlooked song on this record. So I'm just excited that we're going to do it. But there is a quote. Yeah, go ahead.
Not even Todd requested this one?
Nobody has requested this one. So this is one that no one has asked for. And I'm sure that the listener statistics will reflect that lack of request as well. So hopefully people listen to this one, because we're going to have some fun here. But there's a quote on the inside of the album liner notes by Chris Hedges. It's kind of like shoehorned into the Impending Halfhead notes on the lyric sheet. And this is what it says: "None of us is immune. All find emotional sustenance in war's myth. The myth can take many forms. It can lead people to celebrate power among those who are America's enemies, those who lead revolutionary regimes in Cuba or Vietnam, or it can lead us to celebrate our own power. But the process is the same. It is still myth. It still blinds those who swallow it." And that's from the book War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, which is a really great book. I'm not actually seeing specifically why that quote is included in this section of the liner notes. I don't really understand the connection, if there is one, but it is within the little Impending Halfhead section, but it's also right above the name and address withheld lyrics. So I'm wondering if this Hedges quote is just kind of randomly put in there within the album layout, if it's more connected to name and address withheld. But that's what it says within the little section of Impending Halfhead lyrics in the liner notes. So I just wanted to go ahead and acknowledge that there is something in the liner notes in addition to the words for the song.
Are the liner notes the same for this CD as they are for the vinyl?
The CD is in my car and I can't actually check in real time. So that would be interesting. But this is one of the recent repress editions of the record from Fat. It's just the single black LP that's available online right now. And I just got it because It's the single LP disc, and the only other version I had on vinyl was the G7 edition from like 2006, which was a double LP, and which is super annoying to listen to because you have to flip the record constantly. So I bought this single edition from Fat a couple of years ago when they started repressing this one. But as far as I know, this record is available on vinyl at Fat Records website right now. So if you don't have it, I think that you can go and purchase it for available. But yeah, there's this quote in the liner notes that I'm not entirely sure if it has anything to do with the song at hand, or if it just made it in there because that's where it went in the organization. But the emotional sustenance, the celebration of power, there's a little bit of that within this song where people kind of like lord power over one another in rather unfortunate ways in a really localized manner. So, I'm just reaching here for a connection.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that there was a repress of it out recently, because I've got the white green double LP one, and when I was listening to it yesterday, I felt like I was flipping the record every 10 minutes.
Yeah, I've got the double on black from the G7 did originally. It was the first vinyl pressing, I believe, that may have happened. I think the G7 did it first. I'm not sure if there was an original color vinyl with Fat Records in 2005 when the record came out. Is that because I feel like that green swirl one is a lot more
it's
recent.
A G7.
That's the G7. I've got a G7 that's 2 black LPs, not color LP at all.
I could be wrong, but I feel like this is the original one.
Nice. Okay, cool.
But I'm not sure. I got it like literally when it came out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so that you bought that when the release came out.
Yeah, and it says G7
sweet.
On the back. So
yeah, I love the fact that I have a G7 one. But mine are just double LPs. So anyway, Steve, considering this is the final Potemkin City Limits episode, I know that you had an idea for this episode, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I thought it would be fun because I'm a huge fan of the Hard Lore podcast, and they do lists all the time. So I was like, I think we need to do a list too. So
okay,
I'll absolutely rip Bo and Colin off, but we should do our countdown of our top 5 songs we have each on this record.
Okay, sweet. So we're gonna go in reverse order, right? So
reverse
our
order, 5 to 1.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Okay. Do you want to start or should I start?
I can start.
Okay,
my
go for
it.
It.
My number 5 is Fidela.
Okay, nice. Tell me a little more.
So, I as everyone heard when we did that episode, I think that song is such a unique song for them. The structure of the song, the subject matter of the song, I think it's just a really, really strong, different song for them.
Nice. My 5th is Bringer of Greater Things. I had a really hard time choosing between this one and Life at Disconnect. But Bringer of Greater Things slides into my top 5 because this one really shows me the depth of research that was possible for songs on the podcast. Like when I think back about learning the stories of the First Nations men who were picked up in Saskatchewan by the police and then taken on quote unquote starlight tours and then dropped off in the middle of the wilderness outside of the city to freeze to death when it was like minus 30 or minus 40 outside. Learning those life stories of the people who were killed in that way was a really deeply emotional experience for me. And because I had lived in Saskatoon and I was reading about things that the Saskatoon PD had done. So it was just a really, stark moment for me. Like, wow, I can learn so much within these songs that is going to help me learn a lot more about the world. So that one is a really standout one because of how important that song was for me for the podcast process, because it helped me realize like the layers and the stories and the endless amounts of research that I can dive into for each song. So Bringer of Greater Things is my top number 5.
I think that's a great option. That's a good song. It it's hard to pick like a top five because like, inherently like there's no terrible songs on the album.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay. So my number four is Impending Halfhead.
No stinking way.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into why because we're obviously going to talk about it on this episode, but that's my number four.
Okay. My number four is America's Army, Die Jugend marschiert. I think that the time and place in my life when this record came out, 2005, I was 22 and a few of my friends had, gone to Iraq and Afghanistan in the military. Some of them had like dropped out of high school and I think were kind of reeling for a purpose in the world, and learning about the recruitment process and how the United States for generation had been using video games in order to lure people into, committing to years in the military. There was just so much that I learned about, my own country based on what this song did, and the really, really powerful way that the song is written with the story, where they reveal the ugly truth and then they wind up saying the truth out loud part. Like that was a really important thing for me to see with the song. And the song is honestly also kind of hilarious when you think about like the Mindy and everything like that. And it's just like the overall showiness of the toxic positivity of Mindy, the tour guide in the song as well. So I just absolutely loved Die Jugend marschiert. So I slotted that one in at number four because of how much it taught me about my own country in a really specific time and era where there was a lot of beating the drums in war. So I loved this one for number four.
So it's interesting that, like the subject matter of the song is super interesting, and about how, they were using video games as propaganda to get people to, and I just think it just makes me think about how all the different like propaganda tools, and it brings me to like the other day. So I was looking for a new podcast to listen to, like kind of while I lay in bed and fall asleep at night. And I wanted podcast stories about the CIA. And there's a podcast that's done by the CIA. The CIA have their own podcast. I'm like, they've pretty much created a culture where you cannot believe a single thing that's said on that podcast. Like,
yeah,
what's the point of even having a CIA podcast? Because the entire thing is going to be propaganda.
Yeah, absolutely. And there will be, maybe they'll dive into COINTELPRO and they'll give me some notes. I'm really curious about, now I'm curious what they're actually going to talk about on that thing. But yeah, there's no way that you can believe a single word of it because the entire thing will just be defensive and trying to be persuasive about the righteousness of the cause.
And like the fact that we've even talked about it at this point means they're showing up to our houses.
Yeah, this is really scary. So, well, you're out of the country, so you're lucky. I'm actually in the country. So, geez, Louise.
Well, now I'm on the no-fly list. So,
oh God. Okay, so tell me your number three.
My number three is Life at Disconnect.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, I had a really hard time not putting that one on my list. I'm really glad you snuck it in there.
That is such a good song.
I know.
Like a beautifully written song. The performance of it is awesome. It is just such a good song.
I know. And, this one and my number two, which I'll get into in a second, this is, to me, the fact that it's not like a super raging song, that it takes immense technical talent to play this song, but that it's also not like physically overbearing. It's a song that you can play that I feel like a seasoned musicians could play really well at age 75. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like this is a song, Life at Disconnect, which can be a future era. Like that could be like LP 9 for Propaganda. Like if they're in their 60s at this rate, because they make records so slowly, if they do like an LP 9, I really could see something like Life at Disconnect being like a really solid sound for them to play if they ever get to the point wherever they're wanting to like lose the speed and the intensity a little bit, you know?
It's such a refreshing song.
Yeah, I really agree. And that episode that we made for that one with Jason from the band Western Addiction, Jason used to work at Fat Records. And so hearing his stories about being in a band on Fat Records, working at Fat Records, and why he picked Life at Disconnect was a really cool one. Like I absolutely loved making that episode too. My number 3 is a speculative fiction. And for many people, this is their favorite song on the record. Some people, like my friend Christian Bassaraba at the Rad Dads podcast, would say that this is the definitive Propaganda song. Like if he was going to introduce people in the world to the band, Speculative Fiction would be the song that he would choose to do it. So I picked it basically because of how iconic it is. I picked it because it is basically the only song that they actually still play live. Which is honestly a real shame. But you know, that's the band's prerogative. And I also love it because I live on the parallel that is described in the song. Like I live right on the border. It's, you know, I see Canada almost every day because I ride my bike downtown along the Niagara River bike path all the time. So it's a song that's very near and dear to my current context here in Buffalo, where there actually are Battle of 1812 historic sites in the city. So this is a really important one because it connects really deeply to my life, but it's also such an iconic and famous Propaganda song.
I never processed it, but we literally live directly opposite on the opposite side of that.
I know, you're right there. Like, yeah, I'm, you know, next time I go every time I go to Toronto, I'd like basically drive right through your town.
Yeah, it's wild. But yeah, oddly enough, I didn't pick that song in my top 5.
Yeah, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. So I love that our lists are not totally overlapping here. Like you had Life at Disconnect and I don't. And you have Impending Halfhead and I don't. And, you know, I have Speculative Fiction and you don't. So it's really cool to see like kind of where we're landing on these lists.
Number 2.
Yes, go for
number
it.
2, Cut into the Earth.
Dude, okay, say why.
That song is just an absolutely beautiful song.
Mm-hmm.
It's the song I listen to most on this record.
Yeah. So do you want me to say my number 2?
Sure.
My number 2 is also Cut into the Earth.
Oh, that's amazing.
It is, in my view, arguably the most impressively performed Propaganda song. It has the technical performance. It almost feels like jazz in certain parts. Like the introduction, the way that the guitar, bass, and drum come in is completely stunningly beautiful. It took me a long time to really appreciate this song. I think that it took making this podcast to actually figure it out. But when Beeve from Propaganda picked this song as one of the songs he wanted to be on the episode, I was like, okay, there's more. There's something to this that Beeve is picking it because Giant Sons and Agassi and Beeve's style of music, the fact that he was drawn to this one kind of like perked my ears up a little bit. And then the more I listened to this song and the more I watched people do like drum playthrough videos of this song, I was like, this might be the most amazingly performed Propaganda song in the entire discography. Like this song is absolutely masterful. And the opening line is this life. I mean, who cannot relate to some of the ideas shared in this song? But then you go into, and then the stories that are told within the song and what it asks us to think about with regards to how we treat people in the world. Really a stunning song. So I absolutely love this one, and I can't believe we both have it as number 2.
It's one of my favorite Propaganda vocal performances.
Yeah.
It's so good.
How do you feel about the fact that this record is so Todd heavy? 5 Todd songs. This is a lot of Todd on this album.
You may not know this. I'm a Todd guy.
I love that. I can
love
tell
I
here.
love the Rod.
Yeah, man. You got Life at Disconnect on your list. You've got Impending Halfhead. You've got Cut into the Earth. You're 3 for 5 on Todd on this record.
I think this record is like I love the Todd songs on this record so much. And not to like, discount the Chris songs, but like I think the Todd songs are the strong points of this record.
Yeah, and that was a really this. If you think about the Todd songs on Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, they could not be more different than the Todd songs on this album. You know what I mean? Like Impending Halfhead and Super Bowl Patriot would fit in really well on Empires, but Bringer of Greater Things, Cut into the Earth, and Life at Disconnect are brand new sounds for this band. You know what I'm saying? And for a long time, I thought that like Rattan Kane and Hadron Collision like were my favorite Todd moments, but it is absolutely Bringer of Greater Things and Cut into the Earth is like those 2 back to back. Those are honestly like just so magical whenever you think about like a little section of Todd's music within this band.
I'm honestly, give me an album that's all Todd.
Yeah, well, for a long time, I got really into making playlists for the band. And so I actually did several Kowalski playlists that I was like trying to get them to like sequence in a really nice flow. And I kind of lost interest in doing it. But now I'd be curious out there if anybody wanted to make a Todd Kowalski propaganda playlist that they felt flowed very well. Like if they were sequencing an album of only Todd songs, how would they sequence it? So if anybody out there does that, I challenge you to make a well sequenced Kowalski playlist and send it to me, because I'd be super curious to hear how you lay it out.
I feel like that's the last thing Todd would want anyone to do.
Yeah, I feel like us making a podcast about them is the last thing they would want anybody to do as well. But we didn't ask. We just went ahead and did it, and they've been real good sports about it. Okay, so what is your number 1, Steve?
So my number 1 is one that you've already mentioned.
Okay,
my number 1 is America's Army.
Nice, very good. Tell me why.
Again, we have a very different perspective because you're coming at it from living in America through it versus I'm coming at it from being in Canada. But I just feel like the way the song is structured and the performance of it's different, it's fresh, and I don't know, I just have a connection to it. I just really, really like that song.
Nice, cool. Well, my number 1 is Iteration. I think that it is a song that you and I should revisit some point in the future. I did an Iteration episode, sans co-host, and I had some professors and friends on it as guests. So it's a really cool episode, and I feel really good about it in general. But if we ever run out of material and you wanted to revisit Iteration with me, I would be willing to do that. But I absolutely love Iteration. It's one of my favorite songs of all time from any band ever. And for me, it was an immediate latching on to Iteration as my favorite song for the record. So yeah, there's my top 5.
It's a solid album closer.
Yeah, tell me your thoughts on Potemkin within the canon of all Propaganda records.
So within all Propaganda records, and obviously I don't want to get into, listing my ranking my Propaganda albums in order, because I think we'll do an episode on that maybe in the future where we do that. But I would say Potemkin is the Propaganda album I listened to maybe the second least of all the Propaganda albums. The only one I listened to less than this one is How to Clean Everything. but that's not to say that it's a bad record. It's
Yeah.
just I connect with the songs on the other albums more.
Gotcha. Yeah. In the last several years, I think that Potemkin has sort of had a resurgence, or I've seen many people say that this is their favorite record. But when it came out, obviously, it was people were just expecting, Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes Part 2, I think. And it's a pretty stark departure compared to Today's Empires. So I understand that this one was kind of like a harder one to digest for a lot of people, myself included, because whenever you think about songs like Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, Back to the Motor League, Purina Hall of Fame, like these are songs that like were absolutely instantaneously digestible to me. And this one took a lot more work. And I don't think that I ever really fully appreciated what this record was working with and what this record does until making the podcast. I think that if I was just going sheer on like, I want to rock out in my car, I would put on Empires, Let's Talk More Rock, supporting cast, all before I would ever pick this one as well. But, forcing myself to do a deep dive on every single song has really shown me that this is an absolutely wonderful record. And, but yeah, I'm just, glad to hear that, your thoughts on it as a whole, since you were only here for me for 2 of the episodes for this actual record.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point with that, and that the other albums may have more, like they hit sooner when you like upon first listen, you can really pick a lot of stuff out of it. And this one here, it took me years to appreciate what was in it, because it's not, I don't think this is an album that you can put on and listen to just casually.
Yeah.
I think this is a more like intent listening album than just like a background listening album.
Are there any skippers for you on this album?
I generally don't like to skip any songs. I'm not a skip person. Like I and this is crazy because I'm obviously dating myself by being super old here, but I'm not a big playlist person, and I'm not a shuffle person, and I don't like skipping, because I like listening to the albums as they were originally intended.
Yeah.
Because, I like the intent of sequencing. I like the story the album tells from first to last song, and where each song is placed in that sequence. I think it's all very important and part of the story of the album. So I generally don't skip songs.
I do also think I'm in agreement with you that this is my favorite Todd album with the band. So since Empires came out, I would say that if I had to pick my favorite Todd record, it's this one. I think that Life at Disconnect, Bringer of Greater Things, and Cut Into the Earth are 3 absolutely tremendous songs that took me a long time to like come around on, because they're they take more work to love. And in our world that asks us, that does everything it can to discourage patience, this was a record, and these are some songs that I took a long time to come around on, but absolutely love what Todd does on this album. So great top 5. I'm super pumped by that. And yeah, should we go ahead and move on? Do you have anything else to talk about with the overall?
Let's get her moving.
Right on. Well, we have a great guest for the episode. My guest is Mark Oshiro. Mark Oshiro is the award-winning author of the young adult books Anger is a Gift, Each of Us a Desert, and Into the Light, as well as their middle grade books, The Insiders, You Only Live Once, David Bravo, and Star Wars Hunters Battle for the Arena. Mark is also the co-author with Rick Riordan of the New York Times #1 bestseller and the #1 indie bestseller, The Sun and the Star. And when not writing, Mark is trying to pet every dog in the world, according to their bio. So Mark is based in Atlanta, Georgia, and Mark is a massive Propaganda fan. And Steve, get this, Mark Oshiro has an impending half-head tattoo, which is why Mark is on this particular episode. So this is a fabulous interview. I absolutely loved talking to Mark, and I hope that all of you love this conversation. Definitely consider checking out Mark's books. There are many. Mark is wonderful. And so enjoy this conversation with Mark Oshiro. Mark Oshiro, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
I'm so excited.
Yes.
You have no idea. Well, you probably do a little bit, but
I do.
I'm very thrilled. I feel like this is a subject I don't get to talk about very often. So I'm excited to just do a deep dive with you.
Well, you are among numerous authors who have appeared on this show. We've had numerous historians that have their own academic research and academic books and monographs out over the years. We also have several novelists, you and Waubgeshig Rice and John Darnielle among the published novelists on the show. So this is a really delightful little trend that comes out in this show. So I'm wondering if you can just spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they know a little bit about you and what you do in the world.
All right. Well, my name is Mark Oshiro. I am a full-time children's literature author. I have 7 books out in the world. I write primarily middle grade and young adult. And not only that, but I center queer people of color as the main characters in my books. As someone who is queer, non-binary, and Latinx, it has been very important to me to sort of recreate the world around me, especially growing. I mean, I'm sure you know this too. It's so interesting what we read as children, both what was available in like libraries or any public settings, but also what was assigned to us. And so much of that wasn't indicative of actually the world around us. So I'm always conscious of that as I am creating works of art to go out in the world, is thinking where things were missing. What were things that I wish that I had growing up? Either the kind of stories that were being told, the kind of characters that are at the center of them. But yeah, I've been writing most of my adult life. I have been anything from a novelist to a book reviewer to a music journalist. And a good portion of my life traveling the United States, touring with bands, and writing about the whole intersection of art and commerce, particularly as streaming. I mean, when I was a music journalist, that was right around the time streaming started to become a thing, and we were seeing 360 deals and all of these. I was with a lot of like independent bands who were kind of like, what are we doing? How are we gonna like keep up with the times and also make a living out of what we're doing? And so it's so interesting also getting to talk about this specifically on this podcast, because I feel like almost everything in my life has some relevance to what propaganda thinks about, and what the conversations that have happened over the last like 3. God, this podcast has been going 3 years now, right?
3 years. Yeah, we just passed 3 years totally.
That's why I was re-listening to the first Without Love episode yesterday.
Nice.
And it is kind of amazing to me how specific this podcast is, and yet it's like I feel like we're never going to run out of anything.
I know. And I need a break. So badly. I've been working on this podcast nonstop for about 3 years at this point. And I'm just like terrified that the band is going to be like, okay, here's our new record. And I'm going to be like, oh my gosh. And it's going to, so anyway, but it's been, it's been the joy of my creative life. And hilariously, you're going to be on the Impending Halfhead episode. And that is the last Potemkin City Limits episode that we need to make. It's the very last one. Like, it's so amazing to me that you fell into my lap, and so specifically for this song.
That this is the song that didn't get anything prior to this, because even my friends in my life who really, really enjoy propaganda, that is one of their favorite songs of the album. So when you tweeted about it, I just assumed, oh, I missed an episode. There must be something in there, and no, it which is wild to me because it's one of the first of probably 3 songs in the album that I just immediately sort of latched onto.
That is amazing. Okay, well, I don't want to go to the song yet.
Right.
So I do want to talk a little bit more about your writing, because whenever you and I were connecting on Twitter, my friend Mandy, who lives in Youngstown, Ohio, who works in the library system down there, was so excited because that we were connecting, because apparently you're doing something with her library system
in October, and I'm very excited.
That is amazing. That is so cool. So I was so delighted to see that, and I really am curious, as a fan of this band, Propaganda, how their work and their songs over the years, like, does that sort of inspire you at all to like become a creative person yourself at all? Is that part of your journey about like being a fan of this band who is like really big on ideas and then becoming an ideas person yourself? How does that fit in?
Yes, absolutely. And like when I was thinking about this, when you reached out to me, and there's like a handful of bands who I consider like very, very instrumental in how I think about art. And some of them on the more political end of the spectrum, certainly Propaganda, certainly Bad Religion, Good Riddance. Like these were, the bands I was listening to at 12, 13, 14 years old, and learning so much about the world through music. And this idea that you could learn while being entertained just blew my mind. Especially being younger, I would see a word or a concept and I'm like, what is that? What is that referring to? Which I love is still happening with Propaganda as well. Like there's so much fun in like trying to dissect the lyrics, not only get a lot of the like regional references, but have a greater understanding of like, what are the political implications of any given line in a song. And so I've grown up with that approach, but then also on the opposite end, like I've grown up listening to A Fire Inside, and so much of what Davey does with his lyrics is all about that, but more on the emotional introspective side of things, where you can have a work of art that inspires, that empowers, that gets you thinking about things that maybe you haven't thought about. And so that's always been a part of what kind of art that I'm creating, particularly because I know that my intended audience is the same age I was when I was desperately trying to find this sort of outlet in the world and to find a way out of my tiny little home in Riverside, California, where I grew up. These bands were my window out into the world, and also a window into myself to understand myself, being in the closet, struggling with identity, struggling with my own sense of like political worth and what my opinions were politically as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm always thinking of those sort of things when I'm creating art too. So I don't, I have this reputation in the kid lit industry of like, I don't write easy books. Like they might be fun, they might be entertaining, but they are very, complex, either psychologically or sometimes politically. And I don't handhold. I don't like to sort of guide people easily through something. I am okay with my work being challenging. And I think about how many of the bands that I grew up listening to were challenging in one way, even if it was just musically challenging, which is a whole separate thing with Propaganda.
Yeah.
If you think of these chord voicing, I don't like, sometimes I'm learning, like, especially with the Sheet Happens stuff, I'm like, this is not a chord. Why would you think of this? Where did this come from? But I love that. Like, I'm 39 and I'm still being musically challenged by this band. Like, it is an incredible thing.
Oh, amazing. We're the exact same age too. That's really cool.
Yeah. I noticed that. I figured that out like a few weeks ago. I was like, wait a second.
Yeah. So are you learning the music as well? Are you getting those Sheet Happens books and like toying around with it?
Yeah. And actually spent last night, it was just like, I need a moment to sort of relax, and pulled out the Potemkin City Limits one to just go through it and it just remind myself how certain passages go or whatnot. And then for some of the more challenging parts, I like to try to attempt it. I'm not very good at this, but then I'll come back like a month or two later after practice and be like, okay, I'm getting better. And it's so just, I don't have any musical training. I don't know how to read notes. I don't know music theory. So I always learn by listening and then trying to imitate. And so those Sheet Happens things have been life-changing, not just for them. I have like the Protest the Hero one, the Hot Water Music And so it's a great way for me to learn how an artist writes. So yeah, I love those things.
Amazing. Well, Tim from Protest the Hero has become a friend of mine over the course of the podcast. And so he was early on working on a lot of the Sheet Happens books. So it was really cool to hear his stories about how that company came to exist and kind of what the work behind the scenes is like to create those. I'm so glad that you buy those books because that company is doing some really, really cool stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Curious question. Did you have any particular thoughts on like the way that Propaganda addresses like gender, masculinity, sexuality, like throughout their career? Like they have the songs like Fuck Machine, Refusing to Be a Man, Ladies Night in Loserville.
Yeah,
I see all these, it's like a trill.
God.
I see them like a series,
Well, so right now, actually currently sitting on my record player is, what are those little things you put down between the record? It's like a little soft.
Oh, like a slip mat.
Yeah, it's a slip mat. I have the one from the one that says like feminist, pro-gay, the logo thing. Like I have had that one for years sitting there.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm never going to change it. But I remember seeing that in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like 90s. And being in the closet and knowing like I'm not in a space to come out, but seeing someone be so unapologetic about that, just, oh my, like it meant the world to me. And then even, oh God, I think there is that reference in the first song on Today's Empires, where I felt it's so weird because there were so few bands in the 90s who were willing to talk about toxic masculinity or to talk about queerness.
Yeah.
Propaganda was one of the only ones of them. I also am and I've actually had the chance to tell him to his face too, but a lot of the stuff that Davey Havok was doing around gender and being unapologetic about his presentations was so meaningful to me, especially now that I've since come out as non-binary. I was experimenting with dressing different and makeup at 18, 19, 20 years old, and I felt completely safe. And so same thing with Russ Rankin. There's a lot of stuff that Russ Rankin has been singing about over the years too, that I'm like, not only were you ahead of your time, but there were so many of us who needed an like sort of an alternate take on it. So for me, Propaganda has always just felt like a safe band. And it's so weird. I don't know that that's a term that I necessarily use to describe a music. I'll talk about safe people or a safe place. But I think they really have made me feel like, oh, I can be my absolutely ridiculous queer self and love this band. And I don't have to worry about that. What happens, unfortunately, with a lot of bands in the metal and the hardcore and punk rock scene is that terrible toxic masculinity will pop up someday.
Yeah.
And, you're just always sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And here is a band that literally is threatening, like, I will beat you up if you are a homophobe. Like it was the best feeling as a kid, just being like, okay, I'm safe with these guys.
Yeah. Have you got to see Propaganda live at all over the course of your life?
Yes, multiple times.
Tell me.
I had to go back to figure out when that first one was. I was in high school. I knew I was a junior in high school when Today's Empires came out. And I was a little late I had listened to their first album years after it came out. I didn't experience Today's Empires like in real time, like release day. It was a few weeks after that one of my friends at school was like, this is the wildest album. You have to listen to this. You're never going to hear anything like this. And I was like, oh, I know. And I expected what they had previously released and then just listened to this dense guitar tone, super thrashy, and was just like, what the hell is this? And so, those were the days where you just sort of look up like, oh, are they touring anywhere? We didn't have that many venues out in the Inland Empire where I grew up. So it was sort of like, well, we've got the Showcase Theater, we've got the Glass House out in Pomona. I think there were like 2 or 3 other venues. And it just so happens that was if I remember correctly, their first real big US tour was that year in 2001. So I looked it up and it was March 25th, 2001 at the Glass House. And that was what was it called? The Humanitarian Intervention Tour.
Yes.
And I don't know if it was Randy who opened or maybe it was a local band, but that was my first time seeing them, getting to hear, lots of stuff from the first two albums that I'd obviously never heard before, even though the set list skewed much more towards today's Empires. So that was the first of probably about 10 times over the years. And I remember that is actually the only show I've ever seen them do. What's it called?
Ladies' Night?
Ladies' Night. That was the only time. And I'm so thankful for Setlist FM because I've been using it to go back to old shows I saw to see what songs I've seen from various bands. And it turns out I think that is the only time I've seen that song was that one show.
Amazing. So you saw the Kowalski Trio era then?
Yeah.
Amazing. And you're super lucky. I never saw that era.
And what was so wild was how big they sounded.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's, I've seen many trio bands, I also grew up listening to Green Day. And this was before they had multiple musicians on stage or whatever. So I saw the trio Green Day stuff in the late 90s as well. But I remember that whole show just being Todd's and Chris's tone was so thick and heavy on that show. And I was just felt like my face is going to melt off. And I just was like, how do they sound so heavy and big and fast? And also, how are they both singing while playing this shit? I don't understand. It just, it wasn't until I think it was the next year. I think I saw Dillinger Escape Plan for the first time. And then I was also how do you guys do this? I don't understand. I remember just the sheer power the three of them emanated on that stage. God, it was such a good show. Such a good show.
So then you, did you ever see them again as the trio, or did you then see the Beavers?
I definitely saw them on the tour for Potemkin.
Okay.
Once in San Francisco at, I think, the Bottom of the Hill or maybe Slim's. I actually saw them twice on that tour because I saw them once in San Francisco and once in New York, where I coincidentally happened to be on a trip and was like, well, I'm working, but not at night. So I'm just going to go to this show. So I saw them twice on that tour. And so most of them, I've seen them either with Beav or with Sulin.
Awesome.
The vast majority of the shows. But I had been, I had to go back to figure out where I first heard one of their songs. So I'd been listening to them since 96. So I went 5 years without seeing them.
Yeah.
Because I found them through, do you remember Fat Records used to do those comps?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Actually, we did our recent most episode about Fat Music Volume 5 with the War is Peace song. So
an underrated song, by the way.
Oh, it's great. We just did our most recent episode about it. We love it.
I'm two or 3 episodes behind. I found Propaganda through the Survival of the Fattest comp, which I think was the second one.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 90. I was in middle school. That was such a great time for music because so much of it was word of mouth. And I had this amazing friend who would give me mixtapes, literal cassettes. And they had ripped the Survival of the Fattest comp, and it had, and we thought nation states were a bad idea. So that was the first Propaganda song I ever heard, very much in a space of I've never heard anything like this. What is he talking about? I talked about this before, but it involved that heavy lyricism where I was so compelled to look up, what are all these different words? What does this mean? What is a nation state? I don't even know what that is. But I actually remember it was that line, and I'm just a kid. I can't believe I have to worry about this type of shit. That just, there was nothing that spoke to me more as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old punk rock kid who is, starting to get involved with activism and caring about the world. Because I think that's a thing, some of us who go through this experience at a young age, which is, that was also when we were first starting to hear about, climate change. We need to worry about climate change. And it's why do I have to worry about this shit? I'm 13 years old. And so that always grabbed me right from the beginning.
Nice. Very good. Do you have a favorite Propaganda record in general that you go to as your number one?
Mine is Supporting Cast.
Nice. Me too. Nice.
Yeah,
do you have a particular kind of a reflection on why that may be?
It was, I was lucky enough. Potemkin was the first one I experienced in real time. I got it the day it came out. Was very lucky actually with Potemkin and supporting cast. Like I had managed to get the vinyl like as soon as it came out. And with supporting cast though, for me, I feel like there are sort of like the first two records is like one era of propaganda, and then the next two is like the next era. But I feel like supporting cast was just such a leap in terms of musicality. Like when I remember actually it was because of I had spent so long trying to figure out how to play Night Letters.
Yeah.
What just incredible. I didn't know what was going on and I couldn't pick out, certain notes. I couldn't pick out certain chords. And it wasn't until the Sheet Happens things came out that I was like, what the fuck is this tuning? What?
Yeah.
Of course I could never figure it out. I've never seen this tuning in my life, but it was a combination of that. And then that album has some of the best melodies Chris has ever sang. And I just re-listened to it yesterday, but Without Love is my favorite song in that album and maybe my favorite Propaganda song ever. And it just, for me, was the right music at the right time with this incredible combination of, politics and the personal. I probably have a deeper connection to Failed States, to be honest. Like emotionally, there was a lot of stuff emotionally going on at the time that record is something I return to for very specific emotional reasons. But supporting cast, getting to see them multiple times off of that album, I just remember constantly thinking I've never heard an album like this in my life. Like there's just nothing that is this combination between the things I love about heavy metal, the things I love about punk rock and hardcore, and, and maybe some prop fans will be mad, the things I like about pop music, like in terms of constructing melody and the structure of songs, like it just has everything I like in music in one album. God, those riffs.
Amazing.
There's so many good riffs on that album.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so we're going to get into some Potemkin City Limits here stuff because of the song that you're on. I just love hearing people's general reflections. But tell me a little bit about your thoughts on Potemkin City Limits, like as a whole standalone record.
So, like I said, that was the first Propaganda record I got to experience in real time. I remember the announcement, if my memory serves me correct, was maybe like 1 or 2 months before the album came out. So kind of felt like a surprise. It was like we hadn't heard much news, and then it was like, oh, the album's coming out, and then a few days later, I think America's Army was the first. I won't say single, but the first like preview we'd gotten of the album, and I knew something special was about to happen because that song, I think, is the first song they've ever done in Drop D, maybe. I had to go back to Today's Empires and look, but I knew that the sound of it felt a little heavier, and I loved the way the song was sort of split between this really fast, thrashy beginning, and then the whole second half is so gorgeous and melodic. And yeah, so I remember getting it the day it came out. God, it was catchy and thrashy. It was three of my favorite songs are on that album. So America's Army, Impending Halfhead, and Iteration, which I also think is severely underrated.
Yeah.
Propaganda song. I just remember constantly talking to my friends about like, if you think punk rock is dead, you're wrong. Like I need to listen to this album. And I'm sure I could go back to any of my friends who I was real close to at the time, many who I'm still very close to, and be like, do you remember me talking about this album for like 6 months straight? And they would all be like, yes, you wouldn't shut up about it. I just very much was in this evangelizing state of like, this is just one of the best punk rock records ever. And so, I just loved how uncompromising it was. And that was around the time I was making the switch career-wise to becoming a music journalist. And, I guess this sort of answers your earlier question. I wanted to be uncompromising in how I presented my politics and how I presented, my feelings on the world of professional music. And I know that album had a huge, huge impact on me.
Awesome. That rules. Okay. So you have an Impending Halfhead tattoo, correct?
Dude, I can't believe you tweeted that. And I was like, I feel like I qualify for this episode just on this alone.
Well, yeah, 100%. You might be the only person in the entire world with an impending half-head tattoo for all we know. So tell everybody a little bit about your impending half-head tattoo before we break down this song.
Yeah. So it is in 2006, during the summer of 2006, unfortunately, my father passed away. And we weren't super close most of my life, but towards the end, we started getting a lot closer. And one of the things I wanted to do, I very much view tattooing as sort of like I am a passport, and tattoos are the stamps on my body that remind me of specific things or specific parts of my life. And so I was in the market to do the thing my dad and I bonded over. And what made me feel close to him was the original Star Wars trilogy. It was what we would just sit on the couch. As a kid, I would just watch those things, and he would sit there, and we knew every line, and we would often, mime them or repeat them as it's happening. And so I was living in Los Angeles at the time and trying to find an artist who could do something very detailed, very colorful. And so I had a friend who was getting tattooed by this woman named Cindy, who was this tall, burly Vietnamese woman who wore like 2-inch press-on nails, who very much subverted the idea of what a tattoo artist should look like. And I remember going with my friend while he was getting tattooed, and within 5 minutes, I'm like, I'm obsessed with you. Like, I want to be your best friend. I adore you. And while my friend is getting tattooed, she's like, oh, I like some of the tattoos you have. Are you in the market for, any more ink? And I was like, actually, I am. So we're talking about it. I picture my idea. She's like, oh, I have an idea. And it basically was like, well, do you want to do a test run after my friend is done? Like, I have another idea for a tattoo. It's just letters. It's just words. And we'll get into like the meaning of impending halfhead, but I was like, it's just a very small thing. It'll probably take you an hour. And she was like, yeah, let's do it. So after my friend gets done, he gets bandaged up. So what I have is on my right wrist, and it's on my wrist if I'm looking at my open hand.
Okay.
Right, it says "Don't kill yourself yet," and then on the left one it says "Adulthood's worse." And so she was like, "Tell me, what do you want to get?" And I was like, "Well, there's this band released this album I really like earlier this year. I in particular have one song that just means a lot to me." And she was like, "Okay, can I listen to it?" And that was when I was like, "You're the one for me." The fact that she wanted to listen to it and hear it. And it turns out she was like an old school punk rocker. And she was like, "Oh, I used to see shows in Huntington Beach. I seen Henry Rollins do Black Flag." And I was like, "I love you. Like, I'm gay, but we need to get married. Like, I'm obsessed."
Amazing.
And so she listened to it and she was like, hell yeah, this is incredible. Also, adulthood is worse. Like, oh my God, it's so much worse. And she loved it. And so, it wasn't a long tattoo. I'd probably say it took like 30 to 45 minutes. And I did take, I'll send you photos once this episode is over.
Yeah.
But it's just, I wanted it for the emotional reason. I chose my wrists for symbolism, because I do have a history with, depression, and unfortunately had attempted suicide when I was a teenager. And so, I knew that this song was something that was going to speak to me for the rest of my life. And so it made just perfect sense. Like, that's what I do with tattoos, is something that is going to mean something to me forever. So why not, immortalize it forever?
Fantastic. What a story. We have a really interesting set of lyrics here. I was reading it closely today, and it's just like this series of teeny tiny little vignettes that are like these like definitive moments in the lives of various characters. And when I read each sentence, I can like visualize the entire life of each character in each line. Like, this almost needs to be turned into like a flash fiction collection. Do you know what I mean? Like, take the sentence about each character, turn it into like a 500-word short story. Like, I feel like this is like almost like a book outline. Tell me a little bit about your interpretation of the little stories within the song. Just, tell me what you think.
So my understanding too is generally if Todd is singing it, Todd writes the lyrics, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's actually such a great compliment to what he does in general. So many of his songs have glimpses into people's lives. In this way, we get just this vast sense of their interiority, what is happening in their lives, even if they're only there for like, what, 2 lines? So for me, what meant so much about this song was the specificity, exactly what you're talking about. Growing up, I remember so much of the like sort of after school specials or those really cheesy like episodes of TV shows or even books or stuff that we had to consume as kids always painted bullying as this sort of like kids are mean to each other and it's just a part of life. And for me, it felt wishy-washy and it felt toothless because the truth for me is that bullying is always incredibly specific. For example, I had a limp handshake and a limp wrist as a kid, and my mom picked my clothing up until I was in middle school. So those are two very specific images that Todd puts in the lyrics that I was like, oh, holy shit, that's me. And those were the things that kids latched onto. And there's this like, there's a particular pain that comes from being bullied about something you can't change about yourself.
Yeah.
And I felt, there's this thing we talk about, especially a lot in children's literature, about writing things that make you feel seen, where suddenly someone feels like they're peering into your life and they've witnessed something you thought previously only you had gone through. And so that's what I was referring to earlier when I said I latched onto Impending Halfhead so heavily because so much of the bullying I went through was from people. Like, it's weird to look back on it because these kids, kids were calling me the F word slur, calling me gay, calling me queer at like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And it's also weird because I'm like, in hindsight, I'm like, well, you were correct. Like, yes, you were. But it's that thing where kids are very observant and they observe things around them in their environment. But if that thing is demonized as being quote unquote different, they then use that to turn on you. And so then later as an adult, I'm very proud. I wrote a book called The Insiders. It's a middle grade book, so it's intended for kids 8 to 12 years old. And I really wanted to write a book about being bullied that was that kind of specific. So like that Impending Halfhead literally leads to my book, The Insiders, because I just didn't want to do what happened to me, which is I felt like the adults around me like lied to me. They didn't tell me the truth. That bullying is this very specific thing because something about you is perceived as different and unnatural and whatever, sort of adjective that goes along with it. And so for me, my reflection of the lyrics is that this band was saying the cruelty you experienced as a kid was real. It definitely happened. It definitely was specific. It was for all of these reasons. These things are why the world turned against you. And then at the same time, it's also not the end of the world. Yeah. And it is a song that I remember, during my Potemkin evangelism period, I send the album, or sometimes buy the album for people and then be like, oh, what did you think? Oh, I loved it. Impending Halfhead made me feel weird. It's just, I feel like that song's kind of mean. And I was like, I don't feel like you get it. I don't feel like you understand what it was. Because for me, the end of that song and the almost ironic way it ends felt so empowering to me, of like the things you were going through in childhood, you will survive them. And also like, now that I'm an adult, like adults are so much worse. We are garbage. Like we're terrible. But for me, it was just one of the most empowering songs I'd ever heard.
Wow. That makes me so happy to hear, because over the course of this podcast, like you said earlier, I've been doing this for 3 years. No one has ever requested the Impending Halfhead episode before. Like there are some people who like say over and over and over what episodes they're most excited about. Right. No one's ever asked for this one. So I think this is a song that a lot of people really need to revisit as well, because I was thinking about this earlier when I was reading the lyrics. I was like, wow, these are teeny tiny little life stories that can be expanded into full life stories. And there are single moments in lives that sometimes change the entire trajectory of what happens to them from there on out. Like it's like these like turning points in a person's life where it's like there's no going back from this one moment that's defined in the song, you know?
Yeah. Well, and even then, for me, it was, why I never understood people who said that the song felt mean. I was like, I feel like the very context of it is accepting that these people do not deserve this treatment. Like the very first line ends with, he kept hidden from his young tormentors.
Yeah.
And casting the bullies as tormentors feels so deliberate, as like Todd is saying these people are shitty. And any of the things that happened to these people weren't their fault. It isn't something that they deserved, that especially that line, she was once known for her art, not anymore.
Yeah.
And that way that a thing can happen in your childhood and people make it your whole personality. So I talked about this weekend too. I was at the American Library Association's annual conference in Chicago, and I got to do a panel with some friends about writing middle grade, particularly as a queer person who's writing queer middle grade. And one of the questions we asked was, what was your middle grade experience like? And all four of us just laughed. We were like, horrible. Like we all were in middle school in the like 90s, early 2000s, and all of us were pegged as either queer, trans, non-gender conforming, like just a nightmare for us. And I related a story I don't really talk about a lot, but this line, she was once known for her art, not anymore. I was always known as like the smart, nerdy kid until the gay rumors started. And my middle school nickname that adults called me too was Philadelphia.
Oh my God.
And, right? Like once you think about it for like 5 seconds, you're like,
it took me a second. Yeah.
So fucked up. And that was just my middle grade experience. Like I never became known for being the smart kid. I got away from it in high school. And part of it is just literally going to a new population of kids who don't know anything. But that's the thing too, is that, these kids perceive me as different. And then they became my young tormentors. And that thing, I couldn't imagine worse than this, is no one knew me for anything except for this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
Go ahead.
It was crazy. I'm thinking about my experiences as well in those grades. In like middle school and high school, I was on the swim team, and I was always wearing Speedos. And so the pool at my high school had these like windows that were on the second floor, and the second floor windows overlooked the pool. So anytime I'd be walking around like on the pool deck or like in the pool, anybody walking past could see me walking around in Speedos down there. And I was like 6'5". I weighed like 130 pounds, and I looked completely ridiculous. And so I was just, Greg in the Speedos. And so obviously there's a lot of homophobia that comes around with that for kids in middle school and high school as well. When they see you dressed in a certain way, it's all of a sudden like, oh, this is what you are. So I resonate big time with that in my own way.
I'm very lucky that, especially in the last couple of years, I've done a lot of school visits where I'm actually going into schools to talk to them about my books. And a lot of times these kids have like been assigned one of my books to read in class. And so I was doing some visits in New York earlier this year, where one of the kids was like, what was this like? Like, I can't, I was actually visiting like a pride club. And I commented early in the visit, like, it is blowing my mind that not only do I get to come and talk to you about my queer books, but I am meeting with a pride club that has like 60 kids in it in school. Yeah. Like, this is not, I didn't have anything like this. And so later on, one of the kids was like, so what, what was it like? What was that experience? And how would you relate it to like stuff we were going through? And I was like, to give you an idea of just how bizarre and twisted some of the logic of like how homophobia worked. I started middle school in 1996. And at that time, especially in Southern California, where I grew up, the main style of clothing was excessively baggy clothing. The looser, the better, and from 6th grade to 7th grade is when I started middle school, I experienced a massive growth spurt. I grew like 4.5 inches to 5'9". I was, 130 pounds, maybe more like 125. I was like a tiny little twig, but it meant that because of the growth spurt, all of my clothes were tight because I grew up very poor and my mom couldn't afford new clothes. So I was wearing like skin tight clothes, and that's what got called me all of the different slurs. And these kids are like, but you're like, that's what everyone wears. Like everyone like who wears baggy clothes anymore? And I'm like, it's just wild, like the social things that change based on the time you live in. And at the time, that was like one of the, quote unquote, big signs of like being gay was like your clothes are tight. And it just blew these kids' minds. They could not imagine like that's the reason why you would pick on someone.
Yeah.
Which like on the one hand, like I'm so glad for them that this seems like a distant fantasy, that they can't imagine doing that. But then at the same time, they were talking about, well, I remember growing up, and if someone talked a certain way, we used to make fun of them for being gay. And I'm like, well, I had that too, So there are some similarities across the generations, but yeah, exactly. Like the things that got pegged as for homophobia were so wild, like around our time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nuts. And I'm just having all these flashbacks of being in my middle school and high school, because you and I are the exact same age. So
exactly.
the cultural experiences of being 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 mirrored my experiences with you a lot. Now, you were in California, I presume, and I was in Missouri. So obviously those are different contexts and different places, but there's a lot of overlap here as well. I keep thinking about this song Ego Fum Papa from Today's Empires, because it's got these lyrics like, we're down here together, heathens, heretics, kids with blue socks. You know what I mean? Like the kid in the corner with sweatpants, we'll find our own way. This is sort of a complementary piece to that, it feels like, now that I'm thinking about it.
Oh, 100%. And that is actually one of my favorite songs, off Today's Empires as well. But I love, again, it's that kids with blue socks line that I was like, yes, yes, absolutely. It seems that the crime is not fitting in. We're all here with Todd's mom.
Yeah, I know Todd's mom. Amazing.
I love that.
I really want to know. I really wish I knew the backstory behind the lyric of Todd's mom. Like that is just, I talked about that a lot in the episode.
In between King Diamond and Fallen Angels.
I know.
I utterly believe she belongs there, but I'm like, what is it? Like, where does that fall?
Yeah, and I'll never ask, because that is, I had imagined that's an extraordinarily personal and deep lyric that that we probably don't even deserve to know. So, but I love the line of Todd's mom. I just think that it's so sweet and endearing, and that it's likely just dripping with a much, much deeper story behind it that the people in the band know.
So many of Propaganda's songs, know, and I know from your podcast, but then also Chris's, podcast through Patreon or whatnot, it has been such a delight to see the layers and layers and layers of meanings to so many of these songs. Like I remember one of the early ones that Chris had done on Patreon was for Duplicate Keys of Kara, which is still like, that episode is so incredible. I never would have known and never would have figured out so much of that context without that deep dive.
Yeah.
And you're doing it too, because we're not only getting like, well, here's some of the, context for why these things were written, but there's a power in art where the consumer of the art is also adding their context and explaining, well, this is why this resonates with me. Here's how this reached seemingly across time and space to affect me, personally.
Yeah. You know what's so nuts too about that Duplicate Keys episode that Chris did? That is the exact episode that he made that caused me to start this podcast, because I listened. I swear, I'm not even joking, because it blew my mind so much when he did that is the song. That's the episode that he made where I wrote an interview to interview him about just that song and that episode. And if you go back all the way to episode 6, when Chris appears for the first time on the show, it's about his Patreon episode that he made about Duplicate Keys. I just wrote a list of follow-up questions that I had based on his part 1 episode about the essay that he wrote and the story that he told. So our entire episode is just me interviewing him about that exact Patreon episode, which is nuts.
That's what I always assumed that came later, because it was just a later thing. I didn't know it was the original, sort of. That is, I still go back to that whole section where he tells the story, where he's got the music in the background. Like, I remember the first time listening, just transfixed. I don't think I did anything.
No,
I just sat there and just was like, holy shit.
Yeah, well, and I actually bumped up to his top tier membership level because I wanted the transcript for the episode that badly. I was like, well, screw this. I'm going to $12 a month because I need transcripts for all of this. So that's so
that's
funny
amazing.
to me. Yeah. Oh, well, Mark, wow, amazing conversation. You're just such a delight to talk to about this. I love the way your mind is just going in all directions and connecting all these little dots. Do you have a sort of a thought about like why this band matters to you? Like if you could like sum it up, what is it about this band that is so important to you as a person who, has your life and your work and your dreams and hopes and all that stuff? Why does this band matter so much to you?
I feel like this band has made me a better citizen in the world by thinking. I think it is one of the few, artistic outputs that constantly makes me think of myself as part of a collective and not as an individual. And how can I better other people, thinking of all of us as, as globally connected, despite and in spite of borders. I feel like I have learned so much about the world, not only about politics in other countries, politics in other nations. Sometimes I love flexing that I know certain Canadian things, like because of this band, like especially the Canadian. I remember I was in Toronto recently and made a joke about Dear Coach's Corner, from Hockey Night in Canada, and like multiple people were like, "How do you know about that?" There's no way, and I'm like, I listen to propaganda. Yeah, I feel like they made me a better musician. They've made me, I don't know. I think more than anything, they are proof that there's this this asinine idea, especially here in the United States, that the older you get, the more conservative you get.
Mm-hmm.
And there is stuff on Victory Lap that feels just as prescient and important and radical and angry as all the way back from the beginning. And I love that because I hate this idea that as I'm going to get older, well, I'm just going to care less about the world and I'm going to become less progressive and more conservative. It's bullshit. And I love that this band is still putting out music that is so meaningful and well thought out, and lastly, I would say, touching back on what particularly Impending Halfhead means, like to any of you who maybe are white, who are cis, who are straight, speaking about the stuff that is happening to a lot of our communities, like the way propaganda has meant the world to me. Like it means the world to me that I always saw a place in this community of people who listen to this band, because that's not the case for, I talk about this a lot too. Like I've sort of had to fit myself and contort myself like a puzzle piece to fit my way into so many works of art, because the people creating it have never imagined a world where I'm in it. And I don't have to do that with this band at all. I don't have to do that when I listen to things like Impending Halfhead or Cognitive Suicide, which is another one that just speaks to me and, my experience with gender as well. It matters. And I think that is a reason this band has had such a lasting impact and been such an immense part of my life, is because they care. And it's people sometimes think it's corny to care about the world, and I don't care. I want to care about the world and other people, and it is wonderful that that's what this band puts forth out into the world.
I love it. Well, Mark, where can people find you because obviously you're going to get some new love from some propaganda fans out there after this. That is my hope now to spread the word about your work, but also now I'm going to be reading some of your books too, because as a high school teacher, I'm always looking for some good middle grades and some good high school age literature. So I'm going to be checking out your work. I regret that I wasn't able to in advance of this conversation.
It's all good. We're here to talk about propaganda. It's all good.
We are.
You can find me at markoshiro.com. I go by Mark Does Stuff on either Instagram or Twitter. That's it. I keep it very simple. But yeah, that's me. This has been God, what such a delight and so much fun to do. And again, I feel like on a daily basis, I don't get to talk about this band enough. So thank you for also indulging that part as well.
What a pleasure. Mark Oshiro, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to Mark Oshiro for that fabulous conversation. I learned a lot, thought about a lot. It was a real delight having Mark here. Steve, let's go ahead and talk about this tune, Impending Halfhead, 208 beats per minute. What are your thoughts on the musical performance of this particular tune? Tell me what you think.
So my initial thought when I re-listened to this tune recently, and basically every conversation that every time I think of Propaganda and listen to them now, all I do is go back and thinking of them only practicing and performing in the space in which they recorded the Venom cover in the attic.
Yeah.
And I picture them jamming on this song in that attic and Jord playing the song on drums in the attic. And it's just swelteringly hot up there in the summer. And he's just going insanely fast, sweating buckets, trying to like keep up the beat. And it just, that's all I can think about now. And maybe that Venom episode really ruined everything for me because now it's just hilarious. But that's what I think about when I hear this song. I think about Jord just going a million miles an hour up in that attic, sweating buckets.
I love the fact that the band, they must have been like over 30 years old when this came out. So, thinking about these grown adults, playing a song like this is really exciting because it's got that like a youthful, energetic exuberance that you would expect from teenagers. So to me, whenever I think about the band, I think about their sense of humor. I think about their sense of wonder and them connecting to the stuff that spoke to them when they were like 13 and 14 years old. And so to me, that song really carries on that tradition of that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like stuff that they loved when they were a kid, having that come out, even though they're, getting further into adulthood at this point.
It's got such a great youthful intensity to it, this song. And I think that obviously it's intentional, but a lot of the other songs that they put out around this era and since then don't have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I've got a couple details here. I looked at the Sheet Happens guitar book, and that book was transcribed by Sungjung Park at Sheet Happens. I've never said Sungjung Park's name here on the podcast. So whenever I looked at who did the transcribing for the guitar book, I felt that giving a little shout out to Sungjung was a nice gesture. The book was edited by Chris, Sungjung Park, and Luke Hoskin. Luke from Sheet Happens and also of Protest the Hero. And according to the book, the tuning is a DAD GBE. So some of the guitar on this song is very impressive, especially under the choruses. The riff is super cool. And I went through and watched a playthrough video by Clem from Last Note, who does playthrough videos of every single Propaganda song. And the chorus riffs on here, like under the fuck part, you know what I mean? It's da-na-na-na-na-na. Like there's some really cool little licks that go on in there. So there's some really cool little riffs that they sneak in for being such a short and fast song. Underneath the verses, it's a lot more straightforward riffing, but man, that stuff under the choruses and under the little transition parts is really, really cool on guitar for being how short this song is.
It's very much, I think this song is a hidden gem in the catalog because it's just so different to what we're used to getting.
Yeah. Jord is wonderful. Jord's got the little transition sections that connect the verses and the choruses and the bridge. The vocal performance is a completely unhinged Kowalski vocal performance, like that fuck part that I just like sung. That scream is one of his best all-time vocal moments, where he just lets it rip on that part. Like, that is such a great moment. If you listen to it extremely closely, I think that you'll appreciate that oh fuck part that's like so good on this song.
I would love to see if it ever exists. Not it doesn't, and we'll never ever see it, but I would love to see the video footage of Todd recording the vocals of this in the studio.
That would be so cool, because that little scream that he does in the middle of this song, going into that chorus, is completely amazing. And he like goes up like an octave or something. It's just a really intense standout moment in the song that really, like the Big Lebowski, ties it all together. It's just that scream in the middle of this song that really brings this one together for me as far as like the performance goes.
Yeah, and I want to, before we just get away from the drums, the part where Jord is like doing the beat, using the floor tom.
Yeah. Where it's the bridge part where there's just like single guitar note plucks,
and he is motoring, on that beat, and I'm like, man, it sounds exhausting just listening to that.
Yeah. Do you have any particular thoughts on like the recording of this album?
So I have, like I said earlier, I have the green and white double vinyl version of it, and I find the sound is very muddy on the recording. It could just be the pressing of vinyl that I have, because when I listen like streaming, it has a different quality.
Do you like the digital ones that you hear a little bit more?
The digital ones are much more clear.
Yeah.
And it could just be this press of the record that I have, and maybe it was fixed in like the newer presses or something, but the one I have is super muddy, and the drums are not super defined on it. It's hard to really describe, but it's not the best of sound quality.
Gotcha. Well, let's chat about the lyrics a bit. I did a little bit of digging, and there's a little bit of history. So I went on genius.com, where fans of bands can annotate their own thoughts. And so a Genius annotation from somebody with the username Dr. Sharky reads, quote, "This song describes the angst and struggle felt during puberty and teenage years as a whole. It lists events that may seem world-ending to a teen, but are not as severe as such in the end. Finally, it is sending those listening in their teen years a message. None of these events are as bad as what you'll face as an adult. Adulthood's worse. This song describes the angst." And so yeah, that's kind of a really nice little summation from Dr. Sharky.
If I could just pause for 1 second here, and we could just go back to Dr. Sharky here.
Sure.
Is Dr. Sharky a shark that's a doctor, or a doctor for sharks?
That is a really great question. Yeah, maybe a shark doctor. So I wonder if we got a marine biologist on our hands analyzing traumatic teen experiences in Impending Halfhead. How fun would that be?
I was really hoping it would be a shark that's a doctor.
Yeah, that's the premise of a TV show right there. A punk rock loving shark who is a doctor. Wouldn't that be fun? Anybody out there?
I've got like the image of a shark wearing like a lab coat and like a stethoscope, and I'm all over it.
And he likes punk. He likes propaganda. The propaganda loving shark doctor. So there's some more. I went to another website called songmeanings.com, and someone wrote, I think it's about being a teenager, where they say adulthood's worse, zit cream order by mail, etc. If you shoot yourself through the head, you'll only have half a head. It's also about how those who don't progress fast enough get the worst of it. I'm speculating here, but I think that the whole being caught wanking thing causing him to take heroin is an exaggeration. to show what drama queens teenagers often are. I don't know, really. That was from a user named Grime Boy, written in 2006. So that is a many, many years old comment right there. But I think that is, they had a little bit of critique on the lyrics about an exaggerated line within the song. Also, the imagery of a teen with, who has committed suicide having half a head was like really a jarring thing for me to read. And then from there's another one says, here's a few things to consider from Propagandy's FAQ on their website. What is a half head? And then the answer was George Samolesky's worst and inevitable nightmare. And then from 2006 on Propagandy's website, or from 2007, the band updated their FAQ and they said that half head is the band's collective haircut. And another user in 2011 on songmeanings.com wrote, this song is about how hard it is to be a teenager when it comes to peer pressuring and bullying. And the song ends with saying that adulthood is much worse, so it is better to possibly kill yourself then. So there is a lot of darkness whenever you dig into the interpretations of this song online.
Honestly, I think that none of them are incorrect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is not a joyful song at all. Like, it's got, like we said earlier, there's the youthful, energetic performance and the exuberance of it. And then letting out your inner thrasher from when you were like a 13, 14-year-old kid loving heavy music. But the song is not, it's not happy at all. So, there's a little bit of some struggle there. And I think for a long time, I never really even read the lyrics much to this song. I just kind of it would just fly through in a minute and 14 seconds when I was listening to it in the car. But yeah, reading the lyrics is a really intense experience for this one.
And I think it's an important experience to have, though. I don't think this song should be just glazed over.
I agree. Do you have any times in your life where you felt that something happened and basically quote unquote your life was over, or it was all downhill for you there? Do you have any moments that kind of resonate with what it is that the song is presenting, with those scenarios that seem world ending in the moment, but then wind up not being a big deal later on?
I had one day. It's right around the time when I first moved to Toronto, where I had a series of events that happened to me in one day that I was like, after the first thing happened, I was like, okay, today sucks. And then the second thing happened, I was like, okay, today really sucks. And so basically this was around 2004.
Mm-hmm.
In the same day, a long-term relationship ended.
Mm-hmm.
I got laid off from where I was working, and
Mm-hmm.
I was walking back from work, and something hilarious happened in the middle of that. But some person on the street thought I was Prince, and they kept following me around, accusing me of being Prince and trying to take a picture with me. And I'm like, I'm actually like 1.5 feet taller than Prince. So anyways, I used to live down on the waterfront near Sky Dome back then. And I was walking down near the stairs, we're near the CN Tower. And my relationship ended and I got laid off from work. And then I fell down the 20 stairs down by the CN Tower. And I was just laying on the ground in the rain. Being like, I don't think it's going to get worse than this. It was a pretty garbage day. But looking back, I'm like, hilarious day.
Yeah. Well, I was going down memory lane a little bit, and I kind of went a little farther back in my life. I tried to think about the times when I was a teenager, that the song is sort of discussing those puberty years and then just a little bit thereafter. One time I think I was 13, And these guys that I was like desperately trying to be friends with, that I wanted to like me so badly, built this gigantic bike ramp, and they were like all like going off this bike ramp on like their BMX bikes and stuff like that. And I did not have a BMX bike. I did not ever go off ramps or jumps or anything like that. I had no skill at doing any of these things. And like they all had like GT and dyno bikes that they were like jumping off stuff all the time.
Like the pegs on the tires kind of thing.
Yeah, all of that stuff. And so I was like, oh, I'll try it. And so I went off this bike ramp and I racked myself so hard in front of everybody. And I was like, it was like one of the most excruciating experiences of my life as far as pain goes. And they were like, oh, you're never going to be able to have kids now. Ha ha. And they were all laughing at me. And I had these huge bruises like going up like into my stomach and stuff like that. Like it was absolutely one of the most embarrassing and painful experiences all wrapped into one, where people were like literally laughing at me while I had like pain that I felt like I needed to go to the hospital like immediately. And so that was absolutely horrible. One of those moments that was described in the song. Another one is that for years I was a swimmer. And it was a sport that my parents forced me to do against my will. I begged to quit every single year and they continued to make me do it. But the pool where my swim team would practice was in the high school where I went, and there were gigantic windows, floor to ceiling windows all along the upper part of the high school, where the gymnasium room was, where the wrestling room was, where the concession stand for football games was. So if there was like an event at the school, there were people up in those windows watching people swim in the pool, like during swim practice. And so I was essentially like on display in a Speedo in front of my entire town for years. And every single day people would be like, hey, I saw you in your Speedo yesterday. So that was basically my regular experience in school, was people telling me that they had seen me essentially in my Speedo at swim practice like the day before. And it went on for years and years and years. That was like my regular experience in high school. And it completely sucked. So it was, crazy.
I'm curious as to if you have a different perspective on that now.
I mean, I was in really good shape. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, like now it'd be like, I'd say without being, negative, I'd say the better part of the population cannot wear those.
Yeah. And I mean, whenever I was like 14, though, I was like 6'4" and I weighed like 160 pounds. Like I weighed like 40 pounds less than I weigh right now. And I am not an overweight person at all. But I was like essentially like a pale 6'4" toothpick, just a total pencil necked goofball. And so in my view, I looked completely ridiculous, and that I wasn't pulling it off, quote unquote. I felt like I was just like embarrassing to look at. So, now, at 39, like it's pretty freaking cool that I feel like I could go to Brazil and rock one of those on the beach, no problem whatsoever, and feel pretty darn good about myself. But back then it was a very different experience.
Oh, entirely different times. But it's just interesting how that same experience then, now you'd be like there'd be almost a sense of pride in doing it a little bit, right?
Yeah. And it's kind of like the, part of the song. I know that the song says adulthood's worse, but in this regard, the song is wrong, because that was way worse. And now I'd be like, fine, whatever. Like, here we go. So another one that I had is that I started losing my hair in high school before my senior pictures could ever be taken. So in my senior pictures, I have a receding hairline that was, I was constantly trying to cover up my balding forehead. My hairline was like a patch of dying grass retreating, like it defeated warriors on a battlefield, essentially. So that was a really crappy experience of my friends being like, wow, your hair is really, really going fast, huh? You know what I mean? And just constantly, endlessly mentioning it and referring to it. And so I basically spent my entire senior year going to the bathroom and meticulously manicuring the way my hair sat on my head so that people would like not mention my hairline for a single day of school. So honestly, one of the things I was most mad about at the band Propaganda was when they would talk about hairlines in their songs and they all had perfect hairlines. I'm like, you guys have no freaking idea what it's like to be a teenager actually losing your hair and then dealing with that in a high school. And you're singing about receding hairlines in your songs and you all have perfect hair. It was madness. I was furious at this band. I've never actually talked about this on this podcast, but I was really pissed at Propaganda for writing about hairlines while always having perfect hair.
That's a hilarious. I love this story.
Yeah.
I have two things to add. One, it's something I experience kind of on a daily basis now. I think I kind of feel your pain. It's not that like obviously like my hair comes halfway down my back,
right?
But every time I take a shower, I'm like, oh man, like there's clumps coming out.
Yeah. Well, and imagine like being 16 and waking up in your bed and there being like 15 hairs on your pillow. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh God, it was a really, really messed up situation. And I was like buying the Zit cream order by mail lyric in this song was me, but with like hair loss products. You know what I mean? I never used like Rogaine with minoxidil or anything like that.
Like Propecia.
Yeah, but there was other stuff out there that you could use, and one of them was like this like thing that you would rub onto your scalp and stuff like that. So I spent hundreds of dollars with my pizza job money on this like mail order hair loss reduction stuff that did literally nothing. And it was a really crappy experience, but yeah, like imagine being 16 and then having that experience in the shower. Like you're afraid to wash your hair because you know when you rub your scalp, there's going to be hair on your fingers when you take your hands away from your head. Yeah,
it's a terrifying thing that I'm going through right now.
You're going to be okay, I promise you. And when you get to the point where you know, it just where it needs to all just go, man, just shave it off, because never having to pay for another haircut as long as you live is really awesome. I haven't paid for a haircut since 2004.
I mean, I haven't had a haircut since 2019. Yeah, I mean, Zoe's given me like a tiny little trim in the house or whatever, but like I haven't actually gone to a hair cutting place in a long time, but I've got super long hair, so.
Yeah, you got a couple more years. Like you're going to be okay for a while. I promise you it's going to be okay. I will be your hair loss consultant, therapist whenever you need one. So let me know if you need to talk about it. And any of you out there listening who are balding, hit me up and we'll commiserate together, because I've been there, promise.
The other thing that I wanted to discuss here was the senior high school pictures.
Oh, and
again, massive tangent here. So I found out years later, because, you know, so in my high school, I think it's probably the same for all ones, but they have like in the hallways, they'll have like the giant pictures of all the graduates from each year kind of thing, like in frames. So like the 97, 98 year will have their own frame. The 98, 99 year will have their own frame. So that's the way it was in my high school. I don't know if it's the same in yours or.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned years later that my picture was the one that, like the later generations or later years, my picture was the one that everyone made fun of.
Your picture?
Yeah.
Man, like this song is bringing out these memories, man. It hurts.
So because of that, I would like to propose a challenge in that I will find my picture that everyone made fun of. and I will send it to you, and you can post both of our high school pictures
Yeah, I actually
along with this episode.
Oh, dude, actually you're never going to believe this. So we're talking now, it's 10:28 a.m. when we're recording this, and I actually texted my mom less than 1 minute ago asking her if she can send me a scan of my high school senior photo. Like I was like already way ahead of you on that. I was texting my mom like 1 minute ago asking her to send me that. So it's going to happen. And I'm thinking about just making my senior photo the Impending Halfhead episode artwork and having just to be right across my face. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll do a couple of additions for the Impending Halfhead episode artwork that is our senior photo.
Yeah, I'll flip it over to you because my picture, I remember it. My actual picture was taken at 7:30 in the morning.
Nice.
And I took a shower in the morning, and then because it was the middle of winter, like I put my toque on, or whatever you guys call toques in the US.
Yes, toques is good.
I put my toque on and then went to school for the picture, and then I took it off. My hair was just like full flat to my head, like toque head, and like my eyes had barely woken up, and it was just the worst picture imaginable.
You weren't possibly also wearing those glasses that have like the tint in it, were you?
No, I'm only a recent glasses wearer within the last few years. So,
gotcha.
But my eyes were barely open in the picture too. Like, or one was open and one was closed. It was terrible. So
Amazing.
I will find the picture and I will send it to you, and you can post it and everyone can laugh at me.
We have to make that the episode artwork. So anyway, so those are some of my like super embarrassing stories. And the imagery of before we get into the lyrics themselves specifically, the imagery of the "don't kill yourself yet" stuff, Mark Oshiro and I had a really great talk about that particular line during our conversation, because Mark has the Impending Halfhead tattoo of "don't kill yourself yet." The suicide rates in the United States are currently trending in the wrong direction. I mean, it's really important to acknowledge that this song is about teens who are like have a tendency to possibly commit suicide. And so this song has a really dark undercurrent of something that's really real in 2023. And I found an article on usnews.com the other day. There's so much information out there, but just a little bit of a brief overview that suicides among the youngest U.S. teenagers are rising for years and years before the pandemic anyway, with school stress and social media and guns standing as potential factors. And between 2008 and 2018, the suicide rate among 13 and 14-year-olds more than doubled from roughly 2 deaths per 100,000 teens in 2008 to 5 per 100,000 a decade later, which reversed a massive decline that was happening in the 90s. So we declined for years and years, and then we shot back up. So suicide is now the leading cause for death for 13 and 14-year-olds in the U.S., according to Dr. Sarah Wood, who is a professor of pediatrics in Florida. And there's a study in a journal called the Annals of Pediatrics and Child Health, which, for years, studies have been charting like rising depression rates and anxiety and suicidal thoughts and behavior, and that things are getting worse according to the study. So, there's a lot of thoughts on like what is driving it, obviously, but heavy use of social media is part of the story. The pandemic is part of the story. And, before 2008, the study found that the rate was waning from about 2.3 per 100,000 in 99 to 1.5 per 100,000 in 2007. And then it increased 2.5 times between 2008 and 2018. So There is, they go on to talk about the impacts of Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram. And when you think about this song and the little anecdotes that are present within the song, we're talking about 2005. Twitter and Instagram are like post 2007-ish. So we're talking about a mostly pre-social media era entirely when we think about the context of when the song was written and how this song has only gotten more and more poignant and direct with regards to what is going on with teen mental health. And so it's pretty shocking when you think about the fact that this song was written before our current era even really existed. You know what I'm saying?
This was prime LiveJournal, MySpace, Friendster era.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was on Facebook in 2004, but I was a college student. So it really was only available to a certain segment of the population. But yeah, the prevalence and the rise of social media after this song was written is a pretty stark and important detail to talk about.
And it's no wonder, like obviously we know social media and everything plays such a huge role in people's mental health, especially young people's mental health. Like we mentioned it on a past episode, but like I can't even imagine what it's like going to high school in today's world.
Well, I got a soon to be 10-year-old who's going to be finding that out in a couple of years. So, so far so good. So far she's happy and healthy and got good friends. So I'm just hoping that that her experience continues on that path of being mostly positive. But we'll see. It's all part of the process of being a parent in this day and age. So
challenging for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about the individual lines here. We got this opening line. He had a stack of dimes for a dink that he kept hidden from his young tormentors. The imagery here is pretty powerful when you think about being a grade 7 boy in a locker room doing dress out. I would imagine that there are similar experiences for girls of being extremely, concerned about your own body and dressing out and things like that in middle school is a really big deal. All of the fear of being naked in school locker rooms really just jumps out at me on this particular line. Do you have a thought on this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess it's a kind of a slightly different experience for here because we never kind of really had that in school. Like our high school gym, like the showers didn't work. So we never had that issue. So everyone was just gross all the time. But for us, it was more of the hockey locker room.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of it would translate. And, hockey locker rooms, as we know from seeing all the stuff that happened, recently within Hockey Canada, hockey locker rooms are a very toxic place. So that's kind of my experience with this, but yeah, it's extremely relatable for, I think, almost everyone. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, for me in a Speedo, I was like getting full on naked in locker rooms every single day of the week for years, and then going to practice and then getting out. And like now what's really common in swimming is to like have the full knee length shorts that are, very tight and obviously still very revealing, but having them go all the way to your knees is a lot different than having them hug basically like what is like essentially a bikini line, when you're a kid. And so I think there's a big culture shift in the way that the sport that I was in has shifted toward a longer pair of shorts for swimming practices. But yeah, walking up and down the super long hallway between the locker room and the pool, and then getting out of the water and being soaking wet and having to walk down the freezing cold air conditioned hallway between the pool and the locker room while soaking wet. Lot of a lot of really bad memories for me here with regards to this opening line that, I'm not really having a very good time remembering, honestly.
And honestly, swimmers' towels are the tiniest towels in the world too. For some reason, I don't just use a beach towel. But why do you have to use like literally the world's smallest towels? You watch people like in swimming and diving in the Olympics or in like the World Championships, and they come out of the wild with this water, and it's essentially like a face cloth that they're using to dry themselves off.
I know. Well, and if my parents ever listen to this, it's going to be horrible. But yeah, so no thanks to them for forcing me to be a swimmer for like a decade after I was asking to quit. So advice out there for any of you who are raising kids, if your kid begs you to stop something that is not right for them, please take their opinion into consideration. I speak from experience as a 39-year-old man still harboring resentment towards my parents for forcing me to do something for 10 years against my will. So there's my little rant. We got the next line. She crapped her pants, and when it started to stink, they laughed her up a railing high above the river. Bathroom emergency torment. I remember in elementary school, a girl in my class had an incident in class like this. And it is so sad looking back upon, because I just whenever I thought really hard about it, this was like in grade 3. And when I think back on the fact that she just had tears streaming down her face and the teacher did not react nearly fast enough to help this kid, that it really opened up a door for absolutely torture behavior from her classmates. So I remember an incident very, very clearly like this. And then I remember one time I was like 6, and I was having so much fun with one of my friends that I didn't go to the bathroom in time, and then I peed my pants. And so I was wearing sweat shorts that were gray, and all of a sudden I was just covered in pee. And so I had an experience like this where I essentially peed my shorts in front of all of my friends. So I've been on sort of the receiving end of this one. And I've also seen somebody else get tormented in grade 3 for essentially defecating in her pants in the classroom.
I think at the end of the day, and we covered this in my Fidelis episode with Chevy, but we need to be more tolerant or understanding, because accidents happen, man.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the person who had the accident already feels horrible enough.
Mm-hmm.
As a society, we need to be better about not shaming or drawing more attention to that, and just being empathetic, because that's when you look back on these situations, they're one of the most vulnerable moments a person can have.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think we as a society could do a lot better in helping people through those moments rather than putting them down in those moments, because you already feel awful.
Yeah. Well, and then we've got this, we go into the chorus here. A goddamn beige curse. She couldn't imagine worse. She once was known for her art, not anymore. So this is the fear that at any given moment, something bad can happen, and it just totally taints the perception of who you are, what you're good at, and what value you can serve in the world. And once being known as a great artist, and then being known solely as the person who had an accident when they were trying to get to the bathroom, is it's just a really sad thing, because if somebody has a bathroom accident in grade 3, and then years and years and years go by, you move away, you have a new life, everything is great, you've totally almost forgotten about that ever even happened, and then you go back and visit your hometown for the holidays or something, and you walk into a bar to meet a friend, and somebody who was in that room in 3rd grade is in the bar, and they're like, "Oh my God, remember when you pooped your pants in 3rd grade? Oh my God." And then all of a sudden it just comes back, because people have no tact when it comes to not going somewhere that they don't have to go. Because like people don't have to bring up those experiences, but you know that there are many people that never even think twice about bringing up such experiences, and they'll immediately throw that person back into like that pain that they had experienced decades before.
That's something I think, myself included, needs to be better about. Not that I'm walking around shaming people for pooping their pants,
Right.
but like in terms of thinking before you bring up something from the past, because it the other person may not remember it as fondly as you remember it.
Yeah.
And I think, it's something that I'm definitely guilty of, but I think, and it's something that I'm oddly enough, I feel like I'm in therapy right now, but
Yeah.
I feel like, it's something that I'm legitimately going to commit to being better at, as to thinking before I bring up stuff that I thought was hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like there's a few friends that I can think back on from when I was like 17, 18, when I started losing my hair, and who brought it up every single day. Who, if they were to listen to this, they might be like, oh my God, I really was kind of a jerk to you when you were going through something that I have no knowledge of how that felt. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, like what we carry with us over many, many years.
You should name them and publicly call them out.
I'm not going to do that. I'm not. I know, but it's really tempting. It's really tempting, I promise you. So then we get this next line. His mom caught him jerking when she got home from work, and it drove him to stick needles in his arm. So this one is the one that, like, somebody earlier commented from songmeaning.com, where it felt excessive. And this one does feel kind of like a reach for me. Like, I think that if somebody was, pleasuring themselves and their mom walked in on them, I don't really know if I buy the heroin usage after something like that. So this one feels like one of the lesser persuasive and vivid images for me personally. But who knows? Like, everybody's life experiences are different, and who knows what would happen after that? Because maybe the mom would torment them. Maybe the mom was some kind of like purity culture kind of person who would then go on to shame them relentlessly for religious reasons for the next months and months and months. So we don't know what the mom's behavior is in this kind of situation, because it really could be like no big deal, and then the heroin usage would feel excessive. But then it really could be something depending on what kind of culture the household was under. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like this was a reach as well, but again, because I didn't grow up in a traditionally religious house or anything like that, I don't really have any experience. But I was trying to think of a way that it could be plausible, and I think that whole Bible Belt culture, in that I could see it potentially being plausible, kind of how you explained there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I've interviewed people on my other podcast with regards to purity culture and evangelical movements, and there's so there this is plausible, but it has to be a very specific kind of family. So maybe there could be a little more context within the lyrics, like his purity culture mom. Do you know what I mean? Like, add a little bit more detail, because for the most part, I think the moms would be like, oh yeah, duh, obviously that's going on. Whatever. And then they would just move on with their lives. You know what I mean? So I feel like a little more detail in this particular lyric could make this a slightly more impactful and effective lyric. But I'm not a lyric writer, so what do I know? So we've got the next line. She gave one blowjob in the back of a van, and the clap quickly spread across her lips. Teenage experimentation gone awry immediately. It's like the people who have sex one time and are pregnant. Do you know what I mean? Where you're just trying to do something totally normal, and suddenly it immediately backfires on you with your first time. So this is a line that I really felt for the character in this particular line. Hey, Greg here with a little note. I learned today, July 10th, 2023, at the age of 39, that the clap is not chlamydia. Apparently, this is a common mistake. The line references the clap, which is actually gonorrhea. So I learned something new in the editing process. So everything that we say for the next few minutes is incorrect, but still, I wanted to leave it in. Thanks. And I did look up the CDC statistics, the Center for Disease Control in the United States, for chlamydia infection rates. So the report indicated that in the United States in 2021, 1.6 million chlamydial infections were reported, which is a 4.1% increase from 2020, signaling a return to pre-pandemic levels of chlamydia infections. So that's my factoid for this particular line.
I find it crazy that it only went up 4.1%.
Yeah, I mean,
I obviously, because that shows me that people were not isolating in 2020.
Right. Yeah, and that was 2021 too. So it was like, the 2020 lockdowns, like people, I mean, when music started back up, when live music started going on again, I think in August 2021, I went to see Every Time I Die here in Buffalo. And it was like, oh, things are happening again, because like 90% of the people in August 2021 were in the Rec Room in Buffalo, which you've been to, which is tiny. And like, there were like 20 people in that whole entire place wearing masks. So it was an explosion back into social living right at the end of that. So it actually is kind of surprising that the chlamydia infection rates were honestly like so mild, I guess. I don't know, 4.1%. What do I know about this stuff? I don't know if 4.1% is a lot or not. I have no clue.
It seems like not a lot. I feel like it should have been like 20%.
Yeah, like way skyrocketing, because people were just like just absolutely chomping at the bit to get back into the world that we knew before COVID.
Like I didn't leave the house in 2020.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. Okay, so then we've got fuck, there's a fucking curse. Like the best sung vocal on the song is this line where he like screams. It kind of goes up a little bit of an octave. They thought she was such a nice kid. Not anymore. I love that scream. I just got to go back to it over and over because it's so well done. One of the most intensely sung moments on the entire album, I would say, is that line.
Agreed.
So then we got the bridge, a bumpy road for thimble-dicks and pubeless dweebs, you with the natural perm, the brown-toothed, the bald-spotted, bottle-glassed puds, fucking halfhead, bone-racked spazzes with limp handshakes, zit cream ordered by mail, no-boobed girls, man-boobed boys, his mom picks his clothes and she smells like pee. Wow. So much going on there. If you think about Ego Sum Papa from Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, it talks about the kid in the corner with sweatpants, blue socks. This is like something that Todd is really good at, is like seeing the totally ostracized people in society who other people would like see as totally invisible. Do you know what I mean? Todd is a really observant and kind of wonderful person in the regard that he can like see the people that society is like completely overlooking. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And we need more of those people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to learn from Todd with the way that he notices these folks. And the way that it comes across on multiple records, is really cool. The body image, self-image depictions here are really powerful because when we're young, we just compare ourselves to everyone else. So the no boobed girls, man boobed boys line is really powerful because of the ways that we're constantly comparing what we look like to everyone else. And as a guy who walked around in a Speedo for years, you're comparing yourself to other people physically. Like I assure you that line is not an exaggeration in any way, shape, or form. The
more you mention the Speedo, the more that's going to wind up that picture is going to wind up needing to be the this episode.
Well, and it's so funny too, because I'm actually holding the liner notes for Work Quantity is job number 1 right now. And here's the picture of Todd wearing the American flag, like thong underwear or Speedo. So yeah, it's fantastic that has sort of become a recurring theme throughout the episode. And then there's literally pictures of Todd right here wearing exactly that on the liner notes in front of my desk. It's hilarious. Yeah. Thinking back on the discussion of internet culture from earlier, it's important to remember the song came out in 2005 before the total and irreversible takeover of social media occurred. So all of these things, just imagine them as DMs in your Instagram account, relentlessly from people at your school. And then on Snapchat, where like the messages, them like once you read it, like they disappear and they like expire. And then there was no like trace that it ever even existed. Really, really powerful stuff when you think about how the problems that are described in the song have only gotten worse and worse as years have gone by.
It's super sad, man.
Yeah, I know.
It's such a bummer.
It's such a sad song. So then we've got the outro here. These are the mean streets. Don't kill yourself yet. Adulthood's worse. Don't kill yourself at all yet. So the killing oneself imagery here connected with the title Halfhead, because like that person earlier like talked about how if somebody committed suicide, it could like make it be literally like half a head. I just am grossing myself out right now even thinking about it. But considering they're contemplating suicide over teenage issues and experiences, the impending word is also very bleak. Because impending is something that is about to occur. And so that's what's sticking with me here is the title of the song. But the adulthood's worst thing is really tough because everybody has their own struggles and everybody is just trying to do their best. And we do need a very empathetic population who does a really way better job of paying attention to people that are otherwise quite invisible, as you mentioned earlier. So I'm with you on that.
It's one of those things where maybe I'm completely out of line in saying this, but I think, the adulthood's worse. I think, growing up in today's age with the Instagrams and being a teenager in this age versus an adult in this age, as an adult, I can't imagine how hard that is. Like what I do is far easier than having to do that.
I know. And I don't want to wish away my life or anything, but like, I kind of wish I would have been like an adult with a career, like in the 90s. Like, I kind of wish I would have been born in like 1960. So that I could have gone, so that I would be like, basically retiring now. And that I had like my retirement all set and that I didn't even have to be involved in the way this society is now. And I could just like enjoy my retirement, with endless amounts of like retirement door dashing and whatever. I don't know. I kind of feel like, if I could choose, if I had a say, that maybe I would have had my peak adult years, a bit earlier, but what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I wish that any of us have the ability to retire.
Yeah, it's probably not going to happen. We'll see. So as far as the band goes, I could not find any live performances of this song on YouTube. I could not find it listed a single time on setlist.fm. I have a hard time believing that they never played it because this doesn't seem like an overly challenging song. Like they would have no problem pulling off this song live. So I would like to believe that they played it in the mid 2000s. If anybody out there ever saw it, I'd love to know. If anybody out there has seen footage of them playing this or has tracked anything down, let me know. I would love to see it because I have not been able to find it. But as far as I can tell, this is an entirely forgotten song by the band.
I think next time we go see them, we need to just bring giant signs with songs that we've never seen them play and just hold up those signs
Yeah.
the whole show.
Yeah, they'll be like, oh Lord. But interestingly, this song became the name of an Australian propaganda cover band. So there is a band in Australia called the Impending Halfheads, and they do full sets of propaganda songs. Interestingly, that band played Note to Self and Last Will and Testament in the same set. They're playing like the songs that are like 6 minutes long in the same set. And I know that Jamie Hay is in the band. And I know that Kai Smith, who was in a band called Local Resident Failure and does those like chronology YouTube drum playthrough videos, is in that band. So there's a really cool Australian propaganda cover band called the Impending Halfheads that I know a couple listeners of the podcast have actually seen. So just wanted to give a cool hello and quick shout out to Jamie and Kai who are doing Impending Halfheads. I hope you all keep playing in that band because it's really cool and it sounds great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I found a couple of guitar playthrough videos on YouTube, one by Alexi Duveau, who I believe lives in Quebec. We mentioned Alexi's playthrough on the Dark Matters episode, and it was really cool to see Alexi's work pop back up when I began digging into YouTube for this song. So go follow Alexi Duveau's YouTube channel. And then also Clem Last Note has a playthrough video on his YouTube page, which is close up, and you can see the riffs that I was talking about zoomed in really, really nicely. And someone on YouTube said about the song, this is the best lyrics of any propaganda song, LOL. So I'm not sure if the LOL means that they're joking or if they think that it's just the funniest propaganda song, but somebody on YouTube did say this is the best lyrics of any propaganda song, which I found fascinating.
That's an interesting comment.
Yeah. So takeaway for me, very dark song. It speaks to all of our own vulnerabilities about how we are afraid of having our lives ruined, when in reality, those moments can almost always be transcended with time. But in the moment, the pain of waiting for ridicule to end can seem like an endless cave of darkness where no light can really be detected. And then the extreme measures taken happens far too often to escape those moments permanently. So it's a very, very bleak, dark song, but you know, it's a good one. It's a really important song, talking about some important stuff, as you can see.
I think you summed that up perfectly.
Thank you. Well, go ahead and give this one a rating for us then.
I'm giving this a 3.8.
I'm giving this a 2, not because I don't like it, but because I just feel like that's where it lands for me.
That's totally fair. I mean, it was in my top 5. I got to give it something.
I know. I was delighted that it was in your top 5. I love that our top 5s were like, you know, a little different. I love that we both had Cut Into the Earth squarely at number 2. I thought that was a nice surprise, considering the band never plays Cut Into the Earth. And but wow, what a great song. Anyway, getting off topic.
For all 2 of you listening at this point,
yes,
Greg and I, we did not know each other's lists beforehand. This was just we just went into it, so it was equally a surprise for both of us.
Yeah, that was a delight. I was so surprised the yours was number 2. The fact that it was both on both of our lists isn't necessarily the big shocker when you think about how creative and interesting that song is, but the fact that it was both at number 2 is awesome surprise. So, Steve, thank you for closing out Potemkin City Limits with me. What an absolute pleasure to have you here for the last 2 Potemkin City Limits tunes. For the record, my mom texted me back saying that she is going to send me my senior high school photo. So I'm looking forward to you and I being the Impending Halfhead cover artworks. We'll see if that actually comes to pass. I think I got to send it over to my buddy and have him whip it up for me. But if you want to get in touch, propagandapod@gmail.com is the best place to do it. You can also find us on Instagram at propagandapod, and we're also on Threads now. Did you see that we have a Threads account?
I did not see that because I'm trying to avoid it.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I'm on Threads, so we'll see how it goes over there for the time being. But hit us up if you want to chat. If if you have any comments or thoughts or anything on this episode, we always love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening, Steve. See you next time.
See you.